This one is fine. I mean, today's confession is absolutely fine. I don't think there's going to be any issues at all. But, you know, occasionally there are some ethical issues, some moral issues.
Yes. Well, they always are, aren't they?
Of course, that's the very nature of the gig. Anyway, if you've got a top story for us, we would love to receive it. Confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. We would love to give you a smart speaker. And if you have a Christmas confession, maybe it's a nativity, maybe it's a carol service, maybe it's maybe it's a party. Mm-hmm. Remember when we got invited to parties?
Not anymore.
All kind of things like that. So we would like to hear your tales. Maybe it's a Santa's grotto kind of confession. Confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. Today's comes from Flossie. Thanks, Floss. Father Simon, Brother Matt, Sister Susie, welcome back to Drive Time.
Oh, that's yes. Great to be back.
Yeah, nice.
I've always loved this spot and laughed a lot with you and the collective over the years. I even thought to write into the Light programme all those years ago, but not until now have I had the nerve. This confession goes back to the mid-80s. Time of big hair, big shoulder pads, and Philip Schofield on children's television. You don't hear from him much these days. I'm starting to get worried.
Oh dear. Okay.
I worked for a clothing manufacturer in Eccles, Manchester.
Oh yeah.
We had some problems, I have to tell you, with attendance and lateness.
Oh, no.
This was in the days when, now this is new, I've never worked under this regime. If someone was 1 or 2 minutes late, they wouldn't lose any pay. But if they were 3 minutes late, they'd be docked a quarter of their pay.
What?
They would be quartered. Not hanged, drawn and quartered. That would be harsh, even for the greed is good, yuppie culture 80s. No, this is just your pay for that hour would be quartered if you were that late.
For the hour?
Yes. We soon came to realise that some people were taking advantage of the 3-minute rule by coming in late 2 minutes every day, so 10 minutes over the week, but never losing any pay. Yet someone being 5 minutes late on one occasion would be quartered.
Okay.
It's just sound very drastic.
Yes.
To help solve this problem, it doesn't sound like much of a problem, but anyway, to help solve this problem, we decided, I mean, slightly annoying.
Yes.
But, you know, not a huge...
Those are the rules.
Yeah, well, it's a lot over a week, isn't it, if you add it all up?
I guess so.
They could be productive in that time.
So your voice of authority. And moral responsibility. To help solve this problem, we decided to have a competition over 3 months. If the employee was on time and had a 100% attendance record, they would be entered into a draw to win 100 quid.
Nice.
This was more than a week and a half extra pay to some at the time, back in the mid-80s. Big hair, big shoulder pads. Philip on the television.
Wowzer.
It was well received. It went down a storm. One of our employees was a more mature Irish lady called Mary. She was loved by all and was a real character. Mary was one who, although never missed a day's work, would come in late. She was so adamant that she would win the money. She said she could... Well, shall I do the accent?
Oh, yes. Yes, come on.
Yes, please.
Come on. Oh, as I recall, she was from Ireland. Is that not the case,
That's
Mary? Right, here it comes.
Do you think that's wise?
Yes, I absolutely do. I've never been surer of anything in my life.
I don't.
This is going to be brilliant.
Actually, I'm not so sure.
Mary said,
Yeah.
Mary said, I can feel it in me water.
What? He actually did it.
Nice.
Well, she basically said she was going to win because she could feel it in her water.
He actually did it.
I thought it was pretty good, actually.
That was pretty good.
It wasn't bad.
Yeah, it was
See?
all right. Yeah. Well done.
She kept to the rules and was on time every day. As time passed, the amount of people still in the draw grew fewer and fewer. The last few days came and Mary was still on time every day. She was still feeling it in her water.
Yeah.
Wow.
When the 3 months was up, everyone gathered in the canteen for the grand draw. We possibly had 90 people that started in the draw, but only 5 remained at the end. Those 5 names were in the bag. The depot manager drew out the winning name, which was Margot. Oh. It was Margot from sales. And jolly good she was too. She beamed. It was like winning the cash register, except maybe not. The drinks were on her. She was patted on the back and applauded from the room. However, Father Simon, when I got back to my desk, I found it a shocking revelation. What was the revelation? I'll tell you. Here it comes. Ta-da! Revelation music. The piece of paper with Mary's name on it wasn't in the bag. It was on the floor.
Oh, no.
No, Mary never had a chance to win. Her name wasn't even in the bag. She had no chance of winning, even if it was in her water, as she kept saying. What had her waters been telling her?
No, let's not get into that.
How could she ever trust her waters again?
Right, we have got into that. Right, okay.
I don't even think Margot knew about her waters.
No, just leave it.
Never mind telling the future. Or not, as the case may be. I was mortified, but what could I do? The whole factory had just witnessed someone else win the £100. So I did what any self-respecting human resource person did. I said nothing. Until now. So I'm hoping that with the passage of time, and for a genuine error on my part, that I can be forgiven. Yours in hope, sincerity, and most apologetic of apologies. Please can you forgive me? Because it is Christmas. After all, well, let's see. Nice fade.
Nice.
Oh,
Beautiful.
so
Nice
One of my
fade.
favourite.
Lovely.
I'm actually releasing a cassette of my favourite crossfades.
Favourite face.
Yeah. Sister Susie from the pub, what do you say to Flossie?
Flossie, do you know what? It was a mistake. However, it was a bit mean. The poor Mary. I just think, maybe could you have done the draw again? Could you have given Mary a second prize? I don't know, but you could have done something.
Yes.
And you did nothing. So for that reason, I can't forgive you.
There goes Margot swanning off with her
Yes.
goodies. What do you say? Brother from another gutter.
Well, I was minded not to forgive, given that Flossie works in human resources. Big fan of the boys in HR. Love them to death. But I always did myself a mischief with all the with the Irish accent and the talk of the waters. And Margot, there you go. Doesn't that shout out the 80s, Suze? Shout out the 80s to me. So I'm going to forgive.
So it's the people's verdict then. Do you forgive Flossie? Yes or no? It's the people's verdict, obviously, is what we're after here. On the text, 610-554. Start your message with Simon. 610-54. People's verdict on today's confession, which came from Flossie. And it was all about poor Mary, the Irish lady, who felt that she'd won the competition in her waters, but actually she hadn't, because the piece of paper hadn't actually been put in the final paper bag. So it's all Flossie's fault. Anyway, she didn't admit to anything until just now. People's verdict like this.
So Ben says, I forgive, assuming the drinks really were on Margot and Mary made the most of it. Andrew and Pamela in St Helens, we don't forgive. She never had a chance of winning. They should have given her some sort of compensation prize, or maybe let her come into work more than 3 minutes late with no penalty. And finally, Rachel says, not forgiven. How could Flossie keep that secret for so long and not have done anything about it? Definitely onto Santa's naughty list. However, I could have sworn I heard Simon speak with an Irish accent, but went through a dodgy signal area. Please could he repeat what was going on with Mary's waters? So says the nation.
It was a one-off.
Oh, please.
It was just a one-off, which was editorially justified at the
Was it?
time, but that editorial justification period has
it passed?
just expired.
Like the waters.
So that's right. So sadly, it's not acceptable. Your confessions, please. Confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. You get a smart speaker if we love yours at the end of the week. So if you fancy a smart speaker, what a gift that would be. Not that you'd probably get it for Christmas. I wouldn't guarantee it anyway.
Okay.
But what a gift it would be at any time
In
of
January.
the year. Any time of the year, even in February, maybe. So, also, some Christmas confessions. We would like to do some of those if we get them, and we love them, and there aren't too many ethical issues as there are with some that we're getting. You know where you have to send them. Confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. 5:47. It's confession time. We'll have some Christmas confessions if we can get them legaled. Slightly problematic at the moment, but there's a committee. It's an ongoing committee. Are we currently thinking that it's okay? Matt,
Yeah.
that particular one?
Yeah, I think it'll be fine.
Matt?
Wow, really? Okay.
What do you think?
Looking forward to that. Yes. Was that an answer? Who
Not
knows?
really.
Not
Not
really.
really.
Confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk, particularly if you have a festive one, which might mean that we don't need to do this particularly tricky one.
Well, I might tone it down a little bit.
Oh, okay. We're not going to tell you which one, obviously, this one is. But anyway, confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. Today's this is genuinely signed Threatening Dave. That's who it's from.
Okay.
And this was inspired by hearing the... do you remember the one a couple of weeks ago? Leave my wife alone. That one.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
the phone call.
one with the affair.
The prank phone call where it turned out that actually there was an affair going on. Okay. Father Simon and the Forgiving Collective says, threatening Dave, listening to a confession a few weeks ago reminded me of an incident that I thought was long buried in my memory since it happened back in the 1990s when everyone agrees there were different times.
Yeah.
I was working in a large company where my work often involved visiting other departments. In one of these departments worked a young woman, we'll call her Sue, whose boyfriend, we'll call him Pete, also worked in the same department. Sue had her own house, and Pete was a regular visitor first thing in the morning to make sure she was okay.
Okay. Yeah.
If you understand. Now, Pete, as young lads do, like to go out for a few bevies, and on the day in question, he'd been out the previous night against Sue's express advice,
Tut, tut, tut.
and apparently not calling in to Sue's until the early hours, and then falling asleep in a heap on the floor and not going into work. Sue was not impressed. When I went into their office the next day, Sue gave me a phone, a scrap of paper with a phone number on it, and said, ring this number, it's my house. Pete will answer it. I want him to keep getting woken up so he can't sleep his hangover off. It seems she'd been collaring random people all morning to keep ringing Pete.
Okay.
Yeah. What should I say? I asked. Well, just make something up, came the reply. Now, unbeknownst to Sue, I had some acting experience, having played the critically unacclaimed role of fourth villager in The Puppeteer's Tale at school, so felt free to let my imagination wander once I worked out what my motivation was.
Good.
I thought for a few moments and then rang the number. A sound of "bleh" answered the phone. In my most threatening voice, threatening Dave continues, I said, Pete, about last night. My man will be round shortly for the merchandise. You've still got it, haven't you? There's a pause for a few seconds, and obviously Pete's brain fog is still in evidence. Yes? Came the slurred response. Oh, sorry. Yes. So I continued. Good, well, don't let him down. He'll be keeping an eye on your place. My man can be very, persuasive.
I'll bet he can.
When he needs to be. He's parked outside in a black car, so only leave if you've got the merchandise for him. Don't try a runner, because Mr. Grout would be very upset.
Mr. Grout.
And you don't want to upset Harry Grout, do we? So I put the phone down before Pete could reply. A couple of minutes later, Sue gets a call from Pete. Seemingly had sobered up rapidly, and it seems that, here's the thing, by chance, there actually was a man sat in a black car down the road from her house, and he looked like a ruffian.
Yeah.
Pete was terrified and was wondering if there was any way of escaping through the back garden, because he wasn't quite so au fait with Sue's place, and it turns out there wasn't. Sue asked me what I'd said to Pete, because she'd not heard the original conversation. I briefly explained some of the story, feeling guilty that perhaps my acting and plot lines had been a little bit too drastic and realistic, but apparently far from it. Ring him again in 10 minutes, says Sue. Put the frighteners on him
What?
just a little bit more. Okay. So I ring. Is that Pete? Yes. My man is still waiting. He'll call round and remind you. Make sure you don't forget our arrangement. He's not the patient sort. He's prone to, getting carried away. Keep the cutlery drawer closed when you're
what?
Sue took the afternoon off, went home to find Pete hiding behind the sofa, armed with a frying pan, trembling and shaking, fearing that the mafia were outside. She questioned him about who he had actually met and what he had agreed to last night. He thought there might have been some tattoos and kebabs involved, but he wasn't sure. And it was only when she pointed out that the car across the road was now just an old Reliant Robin that he calmed down. Clearly the mob had moved on. However, I do need to confess to Sue, who was unaware of the extent of the threats that my character, threatening Dave, actually made on the phone towards Pete, and to poor Pete, who never knew it was a colleague who threatened him with a heavy mob on behalf of Grouty, who of course was a character in Porridge.
Of course, yeah.
But he obviously didn't twig. So maybe he was a bit thick. But on the plus side, I'm just editorialising there.
Yeah.
On the plus side, next time he went out drinking, he only had a couple of shandies and was very grateful to everyone who spoke to him. And he seemed like a nice guy in the end. Anyway, so let's just see, again, a top fade.
Yeah.
Let's see what Threatening Dave gets out of Sister Susie, the voice of responsibility.
Well, Threatening Dave, when given a task, you really do go for it. Like, that is, you didn't just ring up and pester him and keep him awake from sleeping his hangover off. You went to town, and I do applaud you for that. But I just think, I don't, and also maybe Pete was just a bit too young to know the man from Porridge, because I didn't know the man from Porridge either.
Growy.
Yeah, didn't know Growy.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
But I think it was a bit mean, and he probably was terrified, and his hangover was probably bad enough, so I'm not going to forgive you.
Also,
Threatening Dave.
that sounded like Ray Winston had called him up.
It did.
Exactly right. Brother from another gutter.
Well, I'm going to forgive, and I'm going to say, here's the thing. This comes under the category of what are the chances? The fact that you mentioned a guy in a black car, and that happens to be a guy in a black car outside.
Yes.
What are the chances? That was never going to happen. And also, is it a crime to be so convincing in your acting?
Thank
and
you.
I have to say, like myself, then definitely not, because anyone who's witnessed my acting over the last 6 months will agree with me there. So I'm going to forgive.
People's verdict, please. Do you forgive Threatening Dave? On the text 61054. Start your message with Simon. 61054. Today's confession came from Threatening Dave. How he was asked to make a jokey threat to a colleague's other half, who had too much to consume. Anyway, with hilarious consequences, because he thought he was being threatened by the mafia, because there was a black car outside. People's verdict is here. This is what it says.
Yeah, so Kirito says, I forgive Threatening Dave purely because this confession had me laughing whilst on the bus like a madman. Caroline says, forgiven, I can't stop picturing the man hiding behind the sofa with a frying pan. So funny. But Michelle says, I'm with Susie. It's just a bit cruel. I would have been scared to death. And finally, James says, I've got to forgive just on the pure hilariousness of this confession. P.S. Simon's acting is getting so much better.
Oh, I say.
Is it, though?
Is it? Yes, it definitely is. 14 minutes to 6. Confession time. Lots of happy Christmases at the end.
There are, yeah,
which I'd never noticed before, which I probably should have done. Anyway, so this is another confession for you. We are looking for the Christmas confessions then. Not quite sure how many we're going to bring you, but the prize is incredibly tempting.
Is it?
It's a smart speaker. I mean, it's the same prize, but think of the benefits.
Wow.
Everybody wants a smart speaker. No one wants to pay for it. You have those options. You can work for one of the companies and get one for a discount, or you can just send in a fine confession and we'll give it you for free.
Yeah.
And if this is the best one of the week, then it's going to be the winner, and the smart speaker will be allocated. This one comes from Bad Granddaughter. That's what it signed. Bad. I mean, I think, does this get a warning? No, I don't think so. It's just rather. It's rather unfortunate.
Yes.
Good.
Bad Granddaughter writes, Father Simon, most worthy of judgment, ambrosial Susie, and Mac the exculpator.
That's me. That's what they call me at home.
Bad Granddaughter says, I do not deserve to be forgiven, and am merely writing to you to warn others of my manifold sins and wickedness. This confession occurs in the 1990s. I was 30-something. Family was very important to us, and my grandmother had recently moved to our town for ease in her old age. My mother worked very long hours, and I didn't. Sorry, punctuation was wrong. My mother worked very long hours, and I didn't. So it fell upon me to perform the regular roles required to care for my grandmother. One of these roles was Saturday morning shopping at the local supermarket. My grandmother had played a large role in my upbringing, so I was very happy to give back with these time-consuming chores. My grandmother was like a duchess. Very strict rules and an opinion on many things. From an early age, I had given her the nickname of Grumbleweed because she loved to point out the failings in everything and everybody.
Okay.
Most of Grumbleweed's moaning was around women who worked too much and how modern the world was becoming, or manners and the lack of respect for elders, that the world was going down the pan. It went on and on and on. One Saturday morning, I left my husband and daughter at home and drove to Nan's warden-controlled flat. It was easier if I went alone because if I took my daughter, there'd be mass grumbling on how children are raised. Now, children in the old days were much better and smarter and less complaining. Anyway, Father Simon, on this particular Saturday morning, I did not want to be subjected to the barrel of abuse that was coming my way. I just wanted to get the shopping, do something else, so this is what I did. I went to the supermarket without my Nan. It was easy to replicate her weekly needs, as I've been doing it for years and her choices were generally the same. 20 number 6, a box of matches, a raspberry jelly, a jar of fish paste, a jar of crab paste, some camp coffee with added chicory, quarter pound of humbugs, and a bunch of other stuff, but it was always the same. I knew what to get. I then drove to Nan's flat, carried all the shopping in. Nan was sat exactly where I expected, and this, Father Simon, is where I'm feeling bad. I walked in as though we had already been shopping together. I bet you're glad that's over for another week, Nan, as I carried the bags into the kitchen and began unpacking. I bet you're ready for that Danish that you picked out just a moment ago. Well, this was the point of no return.
Okay.
Would she remember that she hadn't been out? Oh, she said. Yes, please. Won't be as good as what Lions the Bakers used to sell, but it'll do. I bet you're tired after all that exercise, I said. You're right, said my Nan. I'll just have a doze. And that's it, Father Simon. I left Nan happy, searching for words in her puzzle book. And I went home feeling confused by what had occurred. The initial feeling had been happiness, but then disappointment in myself. I never deceived Nan again over the shopping. And Nan stopped moaning about silly things and became the opposite, with praise everywhere. We never talked about Saturday. I can imagine all your righteous listeners horrified and shocked now. I too am horrified and shocked, but you have kids who have demands, you got parents who have needs and demands. This is what happens. Society is to blame.
Yes.
As well as be, I suppose. I forgave myself because I discovered a loophole and never used it again for any personal gain. Part of me believes that she knew what was happening and changed her attitude because of what I did. I will never know the truth, but your judgment will be hers. Will be your judgment.
Will be. Go on.
Will be a judgment.
Your judgment will be the final word in this matter. I'm just changing what she says just at the end. That's kind of what Bad Granddaughter was intending, I think. Anyway.
Like
Well, I mean, it's pretty... this is going to... I think people are generally going to be unforgiving to pretend to your grandmother that you'd all been out quite happily.
Yeah.
Let's see what the voice of responsibility says from the pub.
Well. Do you know, she might have been a bit of a mean person and a bit of a moaner, and that's not very nice. So I can see why, but I just think it's a bit too mean. It's purposefully, you've made her get really confused. She knew she didn't go out, and you made her think she did. And that's just a little bit mean. For whatever reason, and I'm glad you didn't do it again. So that's something, but I just don't think I can forgive it.
Okay, brother from another gutter.
I think she definitely knew. She knew what was going on. It was fine. She was in on it. It was all fine. It was the 90s. We all remember the 90s.
Yeah.
And aren't we all a little bit grumbleweed in a way? I think we all are. And isn't society to blame, really? Probably. I think so. So I'm going to forgive for those reasons.
20 Park Drive and a box of matches.
Yes. Camp coffee.
Camp coffee and a jar of fish paste. I mean,
Fish
you can't...
paste.
And crab paste in the fridge.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
It's a Christmas compendium, that's what it is. It's the people's verdict, please. Do you forgive Bad Granddaughter, yes or no? On the text, 61054. First word is Simon. Today's confession was from the Bad Granddaughter, who basically let her grandmother think that they'd been out shopping, whereas actually they hadn't. She just got the shopping for her, but Grandma didn't realise. A cruel tale. Let's check on the people's verdict.
So Fenella says, Bad Granddaughter is definitely forgiven. Having been there, done that, I rather wish I'd thought of it. Clive, not forgiven unless it runs in her family and her granddaughter goes on to do the same to her. And Rory in Penzance says, forgiven. I may well use that confession trickery myself. Thank you for the inspiration.
That's not the point of the feature. It's not supposed to be inspirational. Love that inspirational feature that you've got there, Greatest Hits Radio. What a fine example you're setting. Anyway, if you've got a confession, we could swap it for one of our smart speakers, if we love it. So all you do is you send us a tale, confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. Plus, if there are any Christmas tales we'd like to have, maybe Christmas down the pub or a nativity play or something that went wrong, whatever you've got, you can send it in, and there'll be another confession for you tomorrow at the same time. Big 45 coming up. Anyway, of course, it's Thursday, so we are going to allocate this week's smart speaker in about the next 20 minutes' time. If you've got a great tale, particularly if it's a Christmas confession, we'd love to give you a smart speaker, but you have to send yours first of all to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. Yes. Are we ready for today's?
Yes.
Okay, it comes from Frank. Frank, thank you very much. Simon and the assembled merciful and wise ones. Let me whisk you back, if I may, to the scorching summer of 1976, when I was employed as a clerk at a branch of a high street bank in Chipping, Sodbury. On the day in question, all was peaceful. Frank gets a little carried away at this point. A gentle summer's breeze had passed. The occasional customer...
Wow.
Occasional customer had popped in to cash a cheque or a traveller's cheque. Currency, total amount, 50 quid per customer. That's all you're allowed. Flies were buzzing lazily on the windows. Okay, skip a bit, Frank. You get the picture. It's 11:30, and my lunch hour, for younger listeners, this was an hour off at lunch, was approaching. Another 20 minutes with a sandwich. As an aside, some of the clerks had taken to spending their lunch hours sunbathing on the flat roof, and I wanted to join them to eat my sandwiches there. Very nice. Anyhow, as I pondered on the hour to come, my reverie was disturbed by Les, the administration manager, summoning me to his desk. This usually meant trouble, and today was no exception. Now then, young Frank, said Les, you know Mrs. Tavistock has died. Mrs. Tavistock was the matriarch of one of the branch's important business customers. I assured him that I did know, and that, of course, I was very sorry to hear this news. Right, said Les, it's which is almost the name of a band, but not quite. Yeah. It's her funeral at midday. You're going to represent the bank. Banks did this kind of thing in those days. Oh, Les, I said, dreams of a pleasant hour on the roof fading fast. Why me? And anyway, I can't go because, look, my psychedelic floral tie is entirely inappropriate. These were the 70s, and everyone wore psychedelic ties back then. Don't think they did, actually. But you're going, said Les, because the manager has an important appointment in the lounge bar of the Squire, and I have an important appointment in the saloon bar of the Oak. And all you want to do is to sit on the roof and ogle the girl's legs. This was indeed true, so I was busted. And so it was that with a heavy heart and wearing the branch's black tie different times, I trudged up to the local Church of England establishment, or church as I think it's known, for the funeral. Yeah. Yes. With Les's instructions ringing in my ears that I should make sure the reporter on the door got my name and knew that I was representing the bank. And this is where it all started to go wrong, because I lurked around the outside of this Church of England church until 12:15 without any trace of her funeral hoving into view. By 12:30, I was sweating like a pig and decided to give up. So I thought I'd best seek out good old Les and admit defeat. It was pleasantly cool in the bar of the Oak and redolent with that smell of beer and tobacco that can never be replaced. Different times again. I found Les and explained that despite my best efforts, there had been no funeral. Bother or something similar, said Les. The boss won't be happy with you at all. I was about to protest at the injustice of all of this when a fellow bar proper-upperer asked what the problem was. Les explained. Don't worry, says this guy. The funeral was actually at the Congregational Church, but as it happens, I was the reporter on the door. So, I will just put you down as being there, and all we need to do is to keep you in the pub for a couple of hours, then smuggle you out of the back of the pub so that you can approach the bank from the right direction. Well, this seemed like a very, very good solution as far as I was concerned. And so that is precisely what happened. I spent an excellent couple of hours in the Oak and then tottered back to the bank. And then the manager, Mr. Campbell Bannerman, hoved into view. Well, young fella, my lad, he said, because everyone in the bank speaks like this. Yeah. How was the funeral? That was very good. It was the best funeral I've ever been to.
Oh, wow.
Mr. Campbell Bannerman sensed what was up, I think, and could doubtless smell the Watney's Red Barrel on my breath. Really, in that case, how many would you say were in the congregation for Mrs. Tavistock's funeral? 238, I said. Really, says Mr. CB, that's very precise. Yes, I'm a very precise kind of banker. Very professional at all times. I see, says Mr. CB. Well, in that case, what did the vicar say? I'm struggling now. Something to do with God, I said.
Yeah.
You don't say, said Mr. CB. Yes, I said, and this was quite clever, I think, on my behalf, and my mind was clearing. He also said that he was sure Mrs. Smith was with the angels. Really, says the manager, did you actually talk to him then? Oh, yes, I said. And that was... I told him that when her final celestial accounts were being drawn up, that I'm sure she would be in credit. Really, said Mr. CB, well, in that case, you're a complete idiot. He viewed me contemptuously and stomped off. I have to report that my imminent promotion was postponed. You don't lie to the bank manager. You don't pretend that you've been to a funeral, particularly if you stink of Watney's Red Barrel.
Okay.
So I have to seek forgiveness not from the manager who was misled, because by rights I suppose he should have gone, but from the family of Mrs. Tavistock, who have no doubt been under the impression that their account was held in such high regard that their bank had been represented at their mother's funeral, when in truth I had been propping up the bar at the Oak and having a very nice time. Fondest regards, like the fade. That's from Frank. You don't pretend to have been to a funeral when you stink of beer.
No.
Anyway, but Sister Susie might think differently, because sometimes she does smell of beer because she works in the pub.
Oh, right.
This is very, very true. But I'm just really disappointed in Frank, because not only was he representing his work, that, you know, he should have been there for work purposes, so you shouldn't have had a drink at all. And you could have just admitted that you went to the wrong church. I'm really sorry. I went to the wrong church.
Yes.
I missed it. I didn't go. Don't lie and say you were there when you stunk of beer and was just propping the bar up for a couple of hours. Although we are grateful for your money at this time. Thank you.
Exactly. Please give generously. Plus, also, how much Watney's Red Barrel would you have to drink to actually be drunk? Because it was like 1% or 2% or something like that. Anyway, brother from another gutter.
I cannot be the only one who's thinking, what exactly has he done wrong here? He went to a funeral he was sent to the wrong church. He then went and told everyone, he fessed up and said, I've been to the wrong church. They all said, doesn't matter, we won't dob you in, you're all sorted. Stay here and have a drink. And then the bank manager is quizzing him. If you're that interested, mate, you should have gone to the funeral yourself.
Very true.
Maybe get yourself represented there, Frank. But on that point, I would say forgiven, because he's not done anything wrong.
Okay, it's the people's verdict. Do you agree with Matt? Do you agree with Susie? On the text, please, 61054. Start your message with Simon. And tonight's confession came from Frank. He had too much Watney's. He lied to the bank manager, saying he'd been to the funeral when he hadn't. He'd just gone to the wrong church. But did he fess up? No, he didn't. People's verdict is in. What have we got?
So Jerry says, utterly forgiven, hilarious. I know Chipping Sodbury well, and nothing funny ever happened there, especially in the world of banking. Seems harsh. Cindy says, not forgiven. How could you lie about such a thing? I could hardly lie about what I had for lunch, let alone attending a funeral. And Jennifer, the landlady, says, support a local business and pub. I have to forgive.
It probably is the funniest story to come out of the banking community of Chipping Sodbury.
I would argue that's true.
I think that's probably certainly right. So we need to decide the smart speaker here. Well, let's allocate our wares. Who's going to get it? Monday's confession was from Flossie. She confessed about not including Irish lady Mary's, and I did that great impression.
You did.
And she felt it in her waters, but she didn't win. Threatening Dave was on Tuesday, was asked to make a jokey threat to a colleague's other half, but was made more convincing by the man waiting outside in the black car. Bad granddaughter was on yesterday, a cruel tale with her and her grandmother. She let her grandmother think they'd gone out shopping when they hadn't. And you just heard our final confession of the week from Frank, who didn't want to go to the funeral, so drank Watney's Red Barrel instead. Matt, what are you going to vote for?
I'm going to vote for Frank, tonight's confession.
OK, one for Frank. What do you think, Susie?
Oh, I'm torn between two. What are you going to vote for?
Well, I asked you first. I think I'm going to go for Flossie and her waters.
Okay.
Here we go.
All right, then. Well, in that case, I'm even though I didn't forgive him, he did spend his money in the local pub, so I am going to give it to Frank.
Wow.
Pub
I
solidarity.
win.
There you
First
go.
time
That's
ever.
right. Matt's back to winner. It's never happened before, apart from in football, obviously. If you have a confession for us next week, we'd love to hear it, particularly if it has a festive twist. Get in touch if you can and send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk.